welcome back from lunch. Shh. Hi everyone, thank you. So again, we've been sort of issuing trigger warnings throughout the day, I think, for this session. So we're going to be covering some fairly heavy topics involving sexual assault. We're going to be talking about the Russell Brand documentary. We can't get the clip to work, so that might not be a bad thing actually. But we will be showing you another clip about another documentary about the royals. So just a heads up that that's going to happen, and another heads up that our guest Alistair is going to have to duck out a little bit early just before the questions start. So he's going to be with us for about half an hour because he's doing a very important interview about his documentary on Radio 4. So he's going to be doing that from one of our edit suites here. So I'm delighted to be able to introduce two investigative journalists from Channel 4's flagship award-winning documentary series Dispatches, which has been making the headlines this weekend. So please give a very warm welcome to Alistair Jackson and Sarah Wilson.
Thank you.
So welcome along. If we can just start by just sort of outlining how you sort of got into journalism and you know how you got to where you are now, really. Do you want to start?
Do you want to go first, Al?
Oh, no, you go first.
Okay. Right. I'm only about sort of 5-6 years into my career, so a lot of the time I still feel quite new. I did an English degree at uni. After that, I left and I actually started out in like a communications role for a tech company. I moved abroad to Berlin for a year and I worked in a comms role there. I started freelancing on the side, kind of writing opinion pieces, features pieces for various papers in the UK and English language papers in Germany. I'd done stuff on my student paper at school, at uni, so I kind of knew it was something that I was interested in and wanted to do. So I did that for a while and then decided that actually I wanted to do journalism full time. So I moved back to the UK for a job on the Yorkshire Post as a digital journalist. I'd obviously had some experience doing writing, but also I think the comms role actually helped me quite a lot because I had experience in social media, writing blog posts, things like that. So I kind of leveraged that to kind of get into the job. I was then at the Yorkshire Post for about 2.5 years or so. And while I was there, I started doing an NCTJ long distance, just kind of in my own time, which got me up to speed on important things, which I'm sure you're all studying, media law, things like that. While I was in that job, I sort of decided that I was quite interested in kind of social affairs, investigations, wanted to move away a bit from kind of features writing and things like that. So I kind of ended up going down that route a little bit while I was at the Yorkshire Post, but I then got a job at the Big Issue as their climate and environment correspondent. I did that for a year. It was amazing, really good fun, great experience. I started an investigation there into, which I'm sure we'll come on to stuff we've done later, but the prepayment meter scandal, I don't know if anyone saw the news about that a couple of years ago, but I did an investigation into that at the Big Issue and it ended up snowballing and becoming quite a big story. And then the job that I'm now in came up at Channel 4 2 years ago now, and I didn't think I'd get it because I didn't have any TV experience, but actually a lot of the skills that I'd gained in print journalism and online journalism and in the investigations I'd done, very transferable. So actually it's a different output but kind of the same skills, and that's how I ended up at Channel 4 where I am now.
Working with me. So I've got slightly longer to go through. I'll try and keep it short. So I did a degree in politics, and then I worked for a while in local radio, sort of at a very low level in local radio sport. I'm a Derby County fan, so I worked at Radio Derby doing the sport, and sorry about that. And I got onto a BBC training scheme, and then spent. So I did that for a year, ended up working regional TV on Midlands Today and East Midlands Today, and then on the other side on Central News as a daily news reporter in regional television before going to London and the London newsroom, working on breakfast TV, the daily news bulletins, having a great, if stressful, time going all around the world doing stuff for the news, and then trying to give you the short version of everything. So I switched over to current affairs, longer form programme making and investigations, and ended up spending about 10 years at Panorama, where as a reporter, producer, and then eventually as one of the executive producers at Panorama. And then about 2 years ago, Channel 4 were looking to set up an investigations unit to provide some heft in terms of investigations for dispatches, as part of a sort of reversioning of how they organise things. And then I made the move to Channel 4. I recruited Sarah and 2 other colleagues, and we work as an investigations unit of 4, making dispatches programmes or developing dispatches programmes. The aim is to do the heavier, sort of longer investigations. Russell Brand was the first one. We did one in an early part of the summer to do with volume crime, and then just this weekend we finished one that was about 4 or 5 months' work that was looking at the finances of the royal family. So that's a short version of a very long few years.
Prestigious career. So just tell us a little bit about the work that you do in Channel 4's investigations unit. And, you know, we seem to be living in a world of social media where people are kind of happy to get all their information or misinformation from social media, and we've now got Trump in power. You know, is there still an appetite for in-depth investigative journalism?
Well, I would say absolutely. I mean, evidenced by the fact that Channel 4 have invested in this investigations unit only 2 years ago. It does require a lot of money, and Channel 4 will be the first to tell me that anyway. And you know, I think you can take comfort from that people, you know, a mainstream broadcaster is doing that, and they're doing it exactly for that reason, because they realise, and they've researched this, that audiences do want the type of journalism that they can trust, and they can be assured that the hard yards have gone into researching stories, so that they can actually use that as a way of sifting through a lot of the noise on social media. Obviously there's a part for that, and we promote our programmes on social media the same as anybody else, but just by way of an example, I've just got some figures through on the way here. The programme at the weekend is most watched dispatches of the year. It's got well over 1 million views, so the channel's very happy. And I would say that when people are telling you that you know, investigative journalism like Panorama or Dispatches is the past, and you know, that really isn't strictly true at all. I think what I would say is you always need to think about how to do things in a different way, how to make films more interesting, how to promote your films, how to choose subjects that are more relevant to younger audiences. But fundamentally, you know, the need for investigative journalism, because of what you said, is as vivid and strong as ever, is what I would say.
Do you want to add to that, Sarah?
No, I mean, I totally agree. I do think there still is a massive appetite for investigative journalism and kind of investigations in general. I mean, I often think the obsession with true crime in the modern age it's just one example of people are really hungry to kind of get to the bottom of things and know the truth. And I mean, a lot of those true crime things, you know, end up being quite damaging. And in the Nicola Bulley case, there were a lot of kind of citizen investigators doing things, and it as Al says, kind of shows the need to have really rigorous, good journalism out there that people can trust. And also, people are, probably get onto this a bit later, but people are really interested in the process as well, in kind of knowing how you did it and how you got to the conclusions that you did, and kind of showing your workings. You see a real appetite for that as well. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think the films we've done so far, thankfully, have performed quite well, and people have come to them and watched them. So, yeah, I think there is an appetite.
And what I'll just add to that, what I would say is I can just about remember being sat where you guys are, and I remember people even then there was always the conversation, there's no money for, why are you going into journalism, there's no this, no that. So I would just say, insofar as you can, ignore all that and go for it, because there is definitely a need for it. It's definitely a great job, and if you want to do it, just block all that out and just believe in it and go for it.
And I guess, you know, going back to the Russell Brand documentary, if we can sort of talk about that, you must have a great deal of satisfaction then seeing, you know, this weekend that, you know, it was making the headlines again. It was broadcast, I think, September last year. It was in the news this weekend because the police have handed the file of evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service as a result of your investigation. You know, how does that sort of feel when you see that in the news?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously it was good to see a development on a story that you've put into the public domain. Obviously it's important to say that he denies all these allegations and they're still to be even charged for them. So I think, you know, part of the reaction is being cautious about that. But obviously when it's been so difficult for people to tell those stories to you, and it's been a long process to get to that point, and you've managed to be successful in telling their stories, and then the authorities react to them, that's very satisfying. And then standing back from that, it is obviously satisfying to see your stories still being in the news. In fact, it broke at the same time as the Royals film was broke. So from a purely selfish point of view, that was very good and satisfying to see. But yeah, I mean, that's what you want to do, isn't it? Is do journalism that lives beyond the programme, that has an impact and actually delivers for the people that have trusted you to tell their stories.
And just tell us a little bit about, you know, how that documentary came about, what kind of work you put into it, just kind of...
Sarah was in the thick of it, so I think she can start with it.
I'm the researcher on the investigations unit, so a lot of what I actually did was going back through archives to try and find material for the film, but also that archive work kind of ended up generating important leads in terms of names, events, corroborating certain times when he was doing certain things, which actually kind of helped legally a lot of the time. There was a lot of things he admitted on the public record, which we then had to kind of bolster our film. So yeah, one of my jobs, which has become slightly famous among the current affairs team, was to listen to every single radio broadcast he did between about 2006 and 2008, which ended up being like 150 hours of radio. So there was like days where I was sort of listening to 5 episodes of it in a day, and I'm a bit of an accent chameleon as well, so actually at one point an Essex twang was sort of making its way into my language, which was slightly frightening, but it all ended up being really important work because a lot of that archive actually made its way into the film itself. And yeah, as I say, it was quite useful for generating kind of things to follow up as well, like people's names that he'd mention or things that actually happened on the show. Or yeah, so that was a lot of my job was kind of doing that basically.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how it started, I think you know it's fair to say there'd been some rumours in the industry about the behaviour of Russell Brand, not necessarily criminal allegations. And if you remember, around about the time we started, Catherine Ryan gave an interview in a sort of alluding to it, and it was suspected that was the name. And we'd had before Sarah arrived, the Channel 4 had a look at it before. But I guess if you're seeking to learn something from our experience of making the programme, it is really, and I always say this, it's the bit that they don't show you in films about investigative journalism, which was the important bit, which is actually, as Sarah's described, listening to all the open source material, as you would call it, to try and understand the landscape which this story might be operating on. So in Sarah's case, that was all the broadcast journalism. Our colleague Geraldine read all the books so that Russell Brand had written, and obviously out of that material came multiple leads which all had to be followed up, be that talking to someone he'd mentioned in the book or finding out the name of the producers on the radio show and approaching them. And obviously slowly through that process and through a few other processes, we then get to speak to people who had direct experiences and wanted to tell us about their experiences and the allegations they were making. And obviously that then becomes a very sensitive process and one where it needs an enormous amount of time and care to be taken because of the nature of the experiences that people were claiming to have. So I would say, if you want to break it down, there's the sort of the two stages to it. There's the getting the detailed, deep landscape of your research in place, and then strategizing and thinking about how you approach it and how you convince people that you need more time. Part of my job is often trying to convince people that want to go quickly because it's costing more money, that we need to actually do the reverse and go slowly, because that's what differentiates you from the daily news, is taking your time and making sure you don't put a foot wrong. But obviously you don't get everything wrong, you make mistakes all the time. But so then as we realised there was a programme, as we got the confidence out of that research to know there was a programme there to be made, we ended up partnering with the Times and the Sunday Times, which is another interesting facet of investigative journalism these days, that you often need partners because that provides you with more resource to do the job when budgets are tight. And to come back to your point, when the media is so fragmented these days, if you are then airing an investigation into various different platforms, it helps you to cut through. So I think people are much more, people in my job and Sarah's job and people that run television channels and newspapers are much more open to those ways of workings than they used to be even 5 years ago. So it's changing all the time.
And we were talking before about, one of the main sort of areas of work for that film was to win the trust of the contributors, the women that were making these allegations.
Yes.
Can you, how do you do that? How do you win somebody's trust to?
Yeah, well, I think I didn't meet any of the people making the allegations. That was left largely to Geraldine, who's our colleague, and colleagues at the newspapers. And Geraldine had an enormous amount of experience doing the grooming stories in Telford for the Mirror newspaper before. So she had lots of experience in that, sort of winning the confidence of people who, these are often, you're often asking people to tell you the most terrible thing that's happened to them in their life and say we're going to put it on television. So it's an enormous responsibility to do that properly. There are some practical things you can offer as you go along. You can tell the person, this is all about building trust, but there are things like saying, at any point you can withdraw your consent, even after you've recorded the interview. Often people want to remain anonymous, and you have to talk them through in details about how that's going to be actually executed on television and whether they're happy with that. Sometimes people absolutely want their voice to be used, but they don't want their face to be shown. Sometimes people absolutely don't want their voice to be used. So everyone is different. Everyone has a different story, and it's just, I think, being alive to that sensitivities, and also from a sort of management point of view, making sure the people that are handling them are up to the job as well, because if you're slipshod about those sorts of things, it's really damaging for people, not only for people's trust in you, but in their actual well-being, and at any point if any of these people had said we're out, even the night before transmission, they would have been out, and we were clear about that from the start.
And just moving on to the documentary that went out on Saturday then, the other big one, so The King, the Prince and Their Secret Millions. That was like a whole lot of other type of work, I think, more trawling, but other type of work. We'll have a chat about that in a minute, but yeah, we'll just play a clip from that, if that's all right, if we can get it to work.
Tonight, what Charles and William aren't telling you about their secret millions.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for paying your rent every now and then.
Their private estates, the Duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall, make Charles and William £50 million a year. But they have repeatedly refused to reveal exactly which properties they own.
Can we have a report on the list of properties?
I don't see why.
And details of how these estates make their staggering profits and from where have remained secret until now.
Wow.
God Almighty.
question.
Thousands of documents obtained by dispatches reveal how hard up government departments, schools, and even the NHS are helping to keep the cash rolling in for Charles and William.
You're making money off, presumably? Making money off the poor person?
So that's just a little bit of the intro. It's well worth a watch.
Yeah, do watch it, please.
Sent you all the links.
Yeah.
So 5,000 land registry documents, I believe, were poured over to make that film. How was that?
You're making it sound like Sarah's got an awful job. So it's hours of... I'm feeling quite guilty here. Hours
It's
of
an amazing job. You do sometimes feel a bit like you're in the trenches when you're sort of like 3 weeks deep into just looking at land leases. I could be a town planner after, I could leave and become a town planner. Yeah, I mean, it was great actually, because it does feel like really properly old school investigative journalism. Like, you have a big cache of documents and you have to go through them meticulously and try and find stories in them, basically. And often you're having to kind of cross-reference things with other kind of publicly available sources, newspaper cuttings, things like that. And obviously a lot of the documents were not particularly revelatory at all. You're just looking at, a lot of them actually were sort of farmland and things like that. But occasionally, you saw on the clip, like, you come across a lease that had the NHS on and you suddenly think, oh my God, what's this? So those moments, which you get when you're doing investigative journalism, those moments are super exciting when you think you found something that's going to be quite big. So yeah, I mean, you do sometimes think, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? 3 weeks in, but it's such a worthwhile process, and it is actually really exciting when you find those things that are going to be big, and actually piecing all the bits together, and especially when we all worked in a team on it, and it was a real like team effort, and yeah, it was fun. It was like really exciting thing to work on, especially when most of those documents had never been seen in public before, ever, and that feeling is really, really exciting. Yeah.
I think Sarah's been quite modest there. I think what I would say to you if you want to go into this line of work is what Sarah has and what the team has is a relentless curiosity for anything really, and so keeping a broad mind, thinking these aren't 5,000 documents from the land registry. These are 5,000 potentially fantastic stories that are going to get onto national television, lead the national conversation for days afterwards. It doesn't seem like that at the time, and the process of from then to there involved Sarah and others effectively sort of getting to know the deep reaches of property law in this country and all sorts of things. But in a way, that is the joy of the job. You can you can any subject you can get into your in tray, and you have to get across it. You have to understand the issues very relatively quickly, and also then use your journalistic instincts to work out where the story is. But for the work of Sarah and the other team and the newspaper we partner with there, none of this that's been on the news in the last few days would be known by anybody. You saw that Parliament were trying to get hold of it over 10 years ago and were flatly refused. So without trying to sound too pompous or stuck up about it, these things can make a difference in the sense that you can deliver to audiences what they didn't know before and get a conversation started, and that is exciting. So, and there is still a place for it.
I mean, probably some of us know about the massive PR machine that surrounds the royal family. Just tell us what the challenges are of holding the monarchy to account.
I don't know if you want to go. I mean, one of the first things is that which is what the whole film's kind of about, really, is that there's just a massive lack of transparency, which is a lot to do with the fact that the Crown is exempt from a lot of things, including some taxes, but they're also exempt from freedom of information, which is a really important tool that I'm sure you guys will know about, that you can usually use to get hold of information from government departments and things. The royals are exempt from that, so you can't get information about them via those means. So actually the lack of transparency is like a big kind of initial barrier, I'd say. But I would say I would be lying if I didn't say
we're going to, when you sat there and think, right, we're going to take the monarchy on now, is not a pause for thought. But in many ways, it is the point, in the sense that I think what we have to do always, and what you should always be thinking about in the stories that you want to do, is thinking, is there a public interest in this? Is it worthwhile? What is the purpose of it? And keep that under review all the time. So you're not just, and obviously, if you start with the monarchy, that is, as Sarah says, the lack of transparency would be one reason for doing it. The enormous amount of public money that's going into it would be another reason for giving you the public interest in it. Because investigating, particularly individuals, but also institutions, is a heavy thing to do, and is regulated by law, and so you have to be always certain that you are deploying it in the public interest. So part of a journalist's job and an editor's job is to always keep that under review. In terms of, and in my mind and everyone else's minds, the monarchy is a subject where you don't have to review that often, although it's interesting because of the way the monarchy is reported in this country. It's not often taken on by investigative journalists or in the way that other organisations are. In terms of how you deal with to your point, the PR machine, well, we're regulated by Ofcom, as I'm sure you would have to give people an adequate time to reply to the allegations that you're putting to them. So those the same as any other, if we were doing it into an NHS trust or Russell Brand, it was exactly the same process. The allegations are laid down, you send them to the Duchy of Lancaster, the Duchy of Cornwall, they have a certain number of days to reply by. They reply, you consider the extent to which you want, the extent to which it's needed to put their reply in the programme. So, in that sense, it's exactly the same as anybody else, as it should be. But obviously, in the back of your mind, there's an adjustment in your head as to who you're looking at. But the process is exactly the same. Yeah.
And some of the media chose to cover the story about the documentary, and others maybe didn't. There was quite a lot of chuntering on social media about
yes,
the
we've
lack
noticed
of coverage.
that. Yeah.
And there was another story about Prince Andrew that came out at the same time,
Yeah.
wasn't there? About the King cutting his funding.
I mean, we will never know whether that story that came out a few hours before we transmitted a very critical story was anything to do with our story going out that night at all. We just don't know.
Brilliant. And I think, does Alistair need, yeah.
So
Al needs to go and do his very important
No, I wouldn't say
radio
that.
interview.
Sorry, that sounds very insulting. It's just
no, not at all.
I have to do what my employer has asked me to do.
About the work that you've done. So, yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. Can we just say thank you to
Thank you very much.
Good luck. So, lovely Catherine will take you.
Thank you.
Excellent. And so, yeah, we can open it up to Sarah's going to field the questions. So, does anybody have a question? Lots of hands going up.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Hello. Firstly, I just really love what you guys do. All the stuff that you do is really good. The Barbie one I really enjoyed as well, like the undercover stuff. So I'm wanting to do a similar one to the Barbie one, undercover work, and I just wondered what tips you would have and what I should bear in mind when approaching that.
So in terms of you're wanting to go undercover? Or you're wanting to do a documentary where somebody does go undercover?
I don't think it would work because I've kind of semi-recognisable now, so I think it would need to be somebody else who would apply for a job in this company.
Okay.
And I just need to know, what I should be mindful of.
I mean, I'm probably not the best person to ask this, but I mean, first and foremost, obviously there are rules and ethics codes in journalism that you have to abide by. Any undercover has to be justifiable in the public interest. You have to have tried every other means possible, through the front door to try and get the information you're looking for, to be absolutely sure that getting it undercover's the only way that you're going to get that information. I have to say, I've not actually sent anyone in undercover myself. That would be like above my pay grade. But obviously safety is a number one thing. You need to have protocols in place and be in regular communication with whoever's going undercover to make sure that you're always thinking about their safety first, because that's much more important than whatever story you're trying to do. Yeah, I mean, I think it would really just come down to kind of careful planning, safety, making sure that kind of ethically and also legally that you're kind of playing by the right rules. But yeah, I'm afraid I'm probably not the right person to ask that question. So I don't know how helpful that was, but yeah.
Hi, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, my question is linked to that, so I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer it or not. But I'm fascinated with how do you, I suppose, plant someone in like a government department, because it's so hard to just get a regular job in the public sector, given their stringent recruitment kind of processes. So, like, do you go through the normal channel and plant them in there, or? So
from what I've, as I say, it wouldn't be my call to like put someone in undercover, but from what I've observed in terms of undercover, in any kind of, so if you say you were sending in someone in undercover at a job that didn't necessarily require much experience or a degree or whatever, so say like there's been a few undercovers done before in things like call centres, so it's quite easy, for example, to get a student to, maybe a journalism student to go and get a job undercover in a call centre. But if you're talking about kind of a higher level job that will clearly require background experience, often those people are selected. You select people who have a background in that area already, or occasionally a whistleblower who's already in a company or has worked in a certain area of expertise will come to you and say, I think XYZ needs exposing in this particular industry, and you would use that person to go undercover, because what you want to do as far as possible is minimise basically anything you're telling that's not true. So you don't really want to be like faking a CV, for example. The lower the kind of what's the word? I'm trying to say. I literally blanking on the word, but you're basically trying to get someone that's as plausible as possible and minimise anything you're saying on a CV that's like not true or whatever. So yeah, sometimes it's kind of whistleblowers, sometimes it's people who or contacts that you already have who you think actually if they applied for that job they'd probably have a good chance of getting it, rather than getting someone who's had no experience in that particular whatever it is that you're looking at, if that makes sense.
Hi, how's this on? I've not seen the programme on the Royals. I will do. But one of the questions I'd have was, it mentioned on the trailer, it referenced like hard up government departments and the rent that was being paid. Mm-hmm. Was the rent on the leases like a fair market rent, or is it an inflated rent? I was just wondering what the angle was. If it was the reasonable rent maybe another property company would charge, is there a bit of an edge to this?
Yeah, so I mean, the documentary is kind of about many things. One of the key things it was about was transparency. So obviously, the monarchy is a publicly funded body. We fund them via the sovereign grant to the tune of several £1 million every year. But they do have the Duchies of Cornwall and the Duchies of Lancaster, which since their inception sort of hundreds of years ago, they've never made any of their property holdings public, despite being asked many times by Parliament to make those public. So the first thing was that it was a transparency point, kind of revealing what they'd refused to tell us. But one of the other points is that whether it's market rent or not, they don't pay any taxes, despite any business taxes, so no corporation tax, no inheritance tax, no capital gains tax, having insisted for many, many years that they don't need to reveal their properties and they don't need to pay tax because they're simply private estates, not companies. But actually, I mean, you can make the judgment for yourself, but they behave in a lot of ways like corporations, but aren't paying any of the usual taxes. And I suppose the other point on that more generally is that they already get money from the taxpayer, and yet there are kind of bodies, NHS, government departments and things, which they're taking more money from. I mean, that's like an opinion point, I suppose, but it was mostly the transparency and the tax point on kind of that. But yeah, watch and make a judgment for yourself, I'd say, yeah.
Hi, are there any topics that you haven't covered yet, but you would like to eventually? And I've also got another question as well. Do you think that Dispatch's investigates things that the BBC's Panorama or ITV Tonight wouldn't cover, because I don't think I could see the BBC covering the royals there, because you could say they kind of play it safe.
Yeah, so on your first point, having been a climate journalist and environment journalist, I'd be quite keen to kind of do something in that area. It's like an area I'm really interested in. But generally, dispatches, one of the fun parts about the job is we kind of cover anything and everything. So it's all, you might end up covering something. I never really thought I'd do anything on the royals, and now I know more about royal finances than anyone. It's ridiculous. The second point, I can't really say. I mean, I haven't worked for either of those other two, ITV or BBC or anything, so hard for me to say what wouldn't or wouldn't get commissioned. But yeah, it's cool to work for somewhere definitely that did commission that, because it's I think it's an important piece of journalism.
Hi, what's your favourite part about your work?
I think it probably goes back to what I was saying earlier, really, about finding kind of nuggets of information, and it's the process of piecing that together into a coherent story, or getting to the bottom of something. I think it's the gratification of revealing something that hasn't been revealed before, or finding a piece of information that hasn't before. That part's really, really cool. And then kind of on the other side of it, once you're done, like I was saying earlier, seeing journalism you've done make a difference in the world is really, I mean, that's what it's all about, It's when you see like the law changes, or even just something as simple as you gave someone who didn't have a voice, and you've kind of secured justice for them, or at least made them feel like they've been heard. Making a difference with what you do, that's really, really satisfying for sure.
Thank you for being here today. My question is, in investigative journalism, when you're starting on like a project, where would you actually start? With which piece would you start with?
Which what? Sorry, would I start with?
Which sort of like piece of the puzzle would you start with?
I think Al explained it really, really well earlier. In that the first step in any investigation is to just read and learn everything you can about what you're trying to investigate, using open sources first. So with the Russell Brand one, for example, as Al explained, it was going back to everything he'd ever done, like all his books, all his radio shows, all his TV shows, watching and reading as much as possible to get a really good grounding in the subject and what it is you're looking at. And then it's from there, usually that work tends to then generate leads, which you can then follow up, and that's when you sort of might end up in more kind of speaking to sources, trying to obtain documents. But to know what questions you need to ask, you've got to do that groundwork first and really understand and know what it is that you're looking at.
Hi, Sarah. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process of how you decide what you're going to investigate, and also who it is that gets a say in that.
So I'd say it's kind of a mixture. It's a mixture of things. It's kind of different every time. Sometimes it's a source coming to you directly. It might be someone random who just emails your inbox. It might be someone you've spoken to for a previous story, who comes to you and just says, look, I have a story, I think you should investigate this, or I've had an experience and I'd like you to investigate this. So sometimes it's that, someone whistleblowing, or someone who has a story about something. But sometimes in a more kind of general sense, one of the great things about investigative journalism is that you get to follow up on stories that the news has kind of not dispensed with, but hasn't had time to kind of investigate further. So there might be a story in the news that you see, and it's in the news cycle for a few days, and you're sort of thinking, I think there's more to this, or I think there's more to look into here. So quite often it'll be, we'll all be brainstorming together, and we'll sort of say, this story's been in the news, and actually I think we should look a bit more into this. So it's taking inspiration from what's happening in the world as well, and considering whether there's more to be done, or whether there's another angle that needs to be explored. So yeah, I'd say it's kind of a mix of those two things, if that makes sense.
Hi Sarah, just following up from that answer really, I just wanted to get an insight really into how important it is to keep following up historical scandal stories, such as the mistreatment of the Hillsborough disaster victims, or the infected blood scandal, or something like that.
it's so important. And actually, like as you mentioned there, things like the infected blood scandal. I mean, that happened, decades ago, but it's such a big story now, and actually it's looking like those victims are going to get compensation, which is amazing because of journalism that's been done around this. And actually, one of the kind of useful things about, from an investigative journalist point of view, about going back to previous scandals is that as time passes, people who might not have been willing to speak, say 20, 30 years ago, their minds might have changed, their circumstances might have changed, and actually you'll find that maybe this is a good time to come back to it because people are ready to speak. So actually it can be a really good way of kind of, it can be a way of getting really, really good stories, is kind of thinking back on what's happened in the past that maybe, some victims didn't get justice here, or that story actually never reached its conclusion there. It's really important to go back to those kind of things.
Hi. Yeah, I was just going to add on to that then. So do you feel sometimes that maybe you could create something in the dispatcher's room of being like, this is what we want to investigate, but it gets shelved, and then sometimes the world that we're living in kind of reflects something that you might want to bring back? Like, does that happen quite often? You'll have ideas and be like, maybe not right now, bring it back.
Yeah, totally. I mean, quite a lot of the job you end up finding, which was like kind of a bit of a surprise to me, is that sometimes you'll even get quite a long way around down the road with a story, and it just won't be quite there. You won't have quite managed to get to the bottom of it, and so you have to kind of put it to one side. But you do always then have that in the back of your head, and sometimes, as you say, something will happen in the news, or there'll be a development on that story, and all of a sudden it becomes like a live issue again, and you can pick it back up. So actually, you kind of do end up with a lot of stories that are sort of like 20, 30, 40% of the way there that you put away and come back to kind of on a rainy day. Totally, that happens quite a lot.
I've got a question, actually. So I'm just wondering how much time you have to take when you say putting something together like the Russell Brand investigation, and before that goes to air. And I know Lee's not here, who teaches a lot of our media law, but the amount of knowledge you must need to have, and what sort of backup you have ahead of pulling the trigger on a program like that.
I mean, that investigation took a very long time, and as I was saying earlier, good investigative journalism, if you want to get everything right, which is super important, just generally, but also to not get sued, you really have to take your time and make sure that you have checked your facts again and again and again and again. But in terms of legal support, I mean, Channel 4 has in-house lawyers, and so we had a couple of lawyers who were absolutely brilliant, who were basically working with us on it. They're part of your team, they're there the whole time, reviewing everything you do. And actually it was really interesting. It was like quite an education for me to be up so close to kind of some of the legal questions that were being raised and some of the problems that were being raised. But most of it is basically just being absolutely sure that you can corroborate everything to the best of your knowledge and check your facts over and over and over again. And anything that's not, things had to come out where we just couldn't get a good enough source for it, or we couldn't absolutely stand behind it and say we would be happy to defend this in a court of law. But yeah, it's our amazing in-house lawyers who work with us, who they're like every step of the way, kind of helping us out and making suggestions and suggesting tweaks and things that should be taken out. So yeah, it's amazing having that resource.
And do you get to, I'm a little bit of a nerd, so do you get as excited as I do when a notification comes through that there's a schedule change for Channel 4 on a Saturday night and dispatchers are dropping something and you get, ooh?
I think knowing what's going on behind the scenes is not as exciting for me.
Shame.
But yeah, no, it's very exciting, especially when you work on something for so long. Seeing it actually go out is a really cool feeling, for sure.
Hi, I just wanted to know, out of curiosity, let's say you do an investigation and you can't find anything at all. Would you still report on that, the fact that you can't find anything, or would you just scrap it until?
No, I mean, if you, that is actually one of the important parts of the job, is accepting when to drop something, because as much as it's really important to sort of think to yourself, even if you want a story to be true and you want to get somewhere with the story, you have to accept the reality that you might do lots of investigating, and the investigating actually reveals that the story just falls down, and then that's a big part of it as well, and it's frustrating, but ultimately, you know, what you put out has to be true and it has to be correct. Sometimes, I suppose, if you're doing a story and in a little part of that story, you're trying to find a piece of information and you can't find it. Like, for example, in that Royals film, we did put in a Freedom of Information request, and we got back, you'll see in the film, we got back a document that was basically almost entirely just like blacked out. And sometimes, you know, that can be, which is kind of funny in a way, and sometimes you can make that part of the story in the sense of saying, you know, we've tried to find answers and all we've got back is this completely redacted thing, which is useless. But I mean, if you started investigating, you know, say a certain topic and you got nowhere with it, you would just have to accept that you were going to have to shelve it and move on. But sometimes a lack of information can be a little part of a bigger story.
Brilliant. Well, I think we're out of time now, so please say a massive thank you to Sarah Wilson.